Hi, welcome to Manning Made Woodcraft. I'm Tim Manning, and in this video I am building my grandma a new kitchen table. This project starts with some ash lumber I picked up at the local lumber yard here in Minneapolis, and I begin by dimensioning the lumber. So I first cut it to length, roughly, just with the circular saw. And then I rip the boards to their final width on the table saw. Here I am using my benchtop joiner to joint both edges of the boards so that I can have a nice tight glue up. And there you go. That is looking pretty good. I spent some time at the beginning of the project arranging the boards in the orientation I like best, and so here I am reorganizing them and getting ready to do the glue up. I'm marking the lines where I will put biscuit joints, and here I am using my biscuit joiner to cut a small slot at each one of those marks that will take a biscuit to help keep all the boards level. And here you can see the slot that the biscuit joiner creates. And now it's time for the glue up. So I went and grabbed the biscuits, and each slot gets a little glue and a biscuit inserted. Generally speaking, you want to make sure you have all your clamps ready to go before you start the glue up, but I was clearly getting ahead of myself and had to run and go grab those. So this glue up ended up being a little hectic because I started everything before I was actually prepared. And in a bit here, you'll also see that I am running out of glue, so I had to run down into my basement and grab my glue as well. So always good to make sure you have all your glue and clamps ready before you actually start. After a couple hours, the glue is hard enough that you can take it out of the clamps. Generally speaking, you don't want to put too much stress on those joints for at least 24 hours, but it's definitely strong enough to move on to the next phase, which is cutting the table to its final width. And I'm doing that with just a straight edge and my circular saw. So here we are the next day, and I am using my crosscut sled on my table saw to cut the breadboard ends to their final lengths. And I'm actually cutting them about a 1/16 of an inch longer than the rest of the table, just to make sure that I'm not short on either of the breadboards. So I'll come back later and clean those edges up with a block plane, but it's starting to look like a table. I decided to attach the breadboard ends to the table using dowels. So here I am cutting dowels to length on the bandsaw and then just trimming chamfer on the end so that they enter the holes easily. And now I'm jointing the breadboard ends for a tight glue up using my number 8 Stanley joiner that my father gifted me. So here I'm using a doweling jig that I made to drill the holes that the dowels will go into. So as you can see in that viewing hole, there's a mark on the table and on the jig, and I just line that up and drill the hole. And here's a close-up look of the work from the doweling jig. It makes a nice consistent hole in the ends of your boards. Now we are moving on to the breadboard end glue up. It's pretty straightforward. Each hole gets a dowel and some glue, and you hammer them home, and then apply glue to the breadboard end, and line up the holes and hammer it home and try to get a good seat. This side was a little tougher than the other side. That little hammer was not enough to seat the breadboard end, so I had to upgrade to my framing hammer, but I was able to get it seated, and just pressure from the clamps was enough to finalize it. Now that the glue is dried, we can get the clamps off and work on the opposite end. So this is really just repeating the previous step. Hammer the dowels home, get a cool close-up, and glue it to the table. And back into the clamps it goes. So now that everything's glued up, we can move on to reflattening the tabletop. So I don't have extra wide belt sander, so the fastest way for me to do this is to just use a sharp hand plane. So I guess I'm gonna true up the sides of the breadboard ends first with my block plane, and then here we go. Now we're using number 5 hand plane to flatten the table. And why not throw in some cool slow-mo hand planing? Yeah, I love that. So after a few hours of hand planing, I checked for flat using some winding sticks that my father made years ago and gifted to me, along with a number of his old hand tools, which is really fun. And we're almost done. So now I'm gonna use a round over bit on my Bosch router and give a nice rounded look to the edges of the table. But gotta get the dog out of the way first. That ends up looking nice and neat. Nice clean edges.
Hey, buddy.
And it looks like it's past inspection. So then we're on to sanding. So I mark up the table with a pencil to make sure I'm sanding evenly, and I believe I sanded up through 220 grit, I believe. And then during the finishing process, I also sanded, I think, up to 320. And here we are, putting some Armor Seal, General Finishes Armor Seal, just a clear urethane finish. And that really makes that ash grain pop. People don't love ash for tables for some reason, but I grew up eating off of a ash tabletop. I think it looks great. And there we go, hairpin legs, and we're done. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.